Welcome to this month's painting tutorial. Today we're going to take a look at how to make a little bit looser approach to some fairly high detail subject matter. So let's start by sketching directly on the watercolor paper. Always start with your horizon line. Make sure that you don't position it right in the center of the page. Then on top of that horizon line, I need to place my major, largest shapes. I've got this rectangular structure here. I've got this rectangular structure here that's almost overpowering, but it's offset a little bit by this rectangle in the background and a figure in the foreground. So if we were going to draw this at its most simple, our painting would look like this. Rectangle, 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 figure. However, there's some problems with this layout. You don't want everything going on at one part of the painting, otherwise it's going to feel unbalanced. Given that, I think I'll be okay if I move my center, this white figure, right over here just a little ways. So now, after everything is very roughly put in place, I'm going to add some of these details. So I have this rooftop here. It's up on stilts, has these cool windows, and some shadow shapes will be down here and there. Then I have some stilt structures going on. Now there's so much information here that with a looser approach we're just going to cut down the information and make it a lot more suggestive. But I want to have enough information on the drawing that when it comes to the painting phase I can cut down without sacrificing realism and quality. And now we can begin painting. So I'm going to start with that sky, get plenty of color mixed up, and then zoop right over the top. And I'm just going to go around this shape and around this shape to preserve them. But I don't want to add too much water to the sky or it's going to really deaden it. So as you paint your gradation down, make sure that you concentrate your color on the top, and then if you need to lighten it, just wipe your brush a little bit on a sponge. You don't need to add water to lighten the color. Now, if I want a looser approach, I'm going to want some areas of wet onto wet. So I'm going to keep getting this wet down here for my mountains and my bushes. I just don't want it to go completely out of control. So I'm just working a bit. I'm going to change to my round. And then I'll drop in these colors just like so. You see how I get a little bit of a bleed, but I don't have watercolor running everywhere like crazy. That's what I mean by just maintaining a little bit of control. Remember the power of having the colors mix on the page. So I'll go in there with a second shade of yellow. I'll let that mix. But now I'll paint in some of these tawny shades that don't quite touch those bushes. And here I have this interesting orangey house. And I blot the color off the brush for the sunlit side. Then down here, I'm dragging down that same color. That's going to be my reflection. And I'll let it touch here so that I'll get just a bit of bleed. Let's move over to these other houses over here. Here's the thatchy color. While that's still wet, I'll throw in some red undertones. Blot the brush and come down with a lighter version of the same thing. Right through that shadow color. That way I will get some of it on the brush and drag it down into the rest of the body of the house here. It's just a little bit more interesting. This is the shadow side of the house, so I'll add more shadow color there. But let me come down and now just add some little details in these pilings. And I'm just following my drawing, let that dictate where they're supposed to go. Okay, bump. Then I'll go in with similar colors, but I'm painting the water. So I'm just going to spritz the paper down a little bit. I want it to be evenly and uniformly wet, so I'm going to spritz it and then I'm going to use my flat to smooth the water down. Now that it's had a little time to dry, I will go ahead and add my pilings and see that they're just wet enough to give them a reflective, watery quality. I just follow those around like this. And then I have a lot of these horizontal lines going through the reflections once they're still wet. So I'm going to paint those in now while my lines are still wet, so that they all kind of blend together, make a nice realistic reflection. Now I'm going to paint more on that water in the foreground here. I know that the house roof is reflecting here, so I'm just going to avoid that interesting shape. Now to save time here, I'm just going to go right over the top because these pilings are dark on this side. But then here, I need to get close and paint around those reflections. I'll add a little bit of the watercolor here between these pilings. Now I'm going to move to these mountains. I need to stand out from the sky and the brown houses. So I'm just putting down some purples and reds, and then I'll wash that color out and lighten it up just a bit. And let's move over here and add some of this weathered wood. There's this gray color, and these cross beams are darker. The water here is dry enough now that I can put them right over the top. And I'm going to layer in some different colors of browns, and then once that's completely dry, you can just kind of scuffle over the top of it and fill in some of those bright whites. Zip, done. I'll also put in these gray side pieces, and then I'm going to let those dry and protect them with masking fluid because the background area has to be really dark. I'm going to let this dry, and then we're going to put the shadows in as one big piece so that they all flow together and it looks better. And we'll do some more details at that point as well. Now the masking fluid that I put over these pilings is dried, so I'm going to wash in some dark shadows. So I'll just get some brushes wet, mix up a nice shadow blue. Then you're just going to start down here. Pay attention to your reference material as you go. And I'm just making some of these watery shapes. Then you see under here, this is in shadow. And then we have these pilings that come down straight like this. Then I'll come down and join this shadow watercolor after painting the reflections on these pilings, just like this. And this is protected, so I can also go in behind here where there's a dark green. And then most importantly, I have these dark intense shadows up here in this building. So this is why I masked out the light pilings beforehand. I wanted to be able to go over the top here and make it nice and flowing. I'll add just a little bit of brown in here, make those shadows stand out a little bit. Then I'll just add a few of these little shapes a little bit more deliberately here. Here's some different colors of ripples in the water. So here we're just painting some of these ripples on the pond. Over here I'm going to switch to a more greeny brown color. And then down here on the underside of the boat, it's very dark and sharp and deliberate. Then when we get to this house on the right side, we need to do some similar work making these shadows. So I can still use this large round, and then I have a lot of these shapes protected with masking fluid as well, so that I can just quickly paint in some darks. I'm just closely referring to the photograph to help me get the sense of where things need to go, and then just painting them where I see them. So I want you to work on this step. I'm going to do a little bit more off camera, but this is the process that I'm going to take to fill in the rest of these darks, and I'll come back when it's time to take the masking fluid off. Now all of this is dry and it's time to remove the masking fluid. So I'm going to use a rubber cement eraser and just rub right over the top of the surface. Get all that masking fluid up. So now let's work on some of these details and sharpen things up to the next level. I'm going to move down to a slightly smaller round and put in some of the colors that I see in the water around the figure and in the background houses. The smaller round will help me to get these smaller shapes a little bit more accurate. I'm not going to be too fussy with these houses. I want them to be fairly accurate so that they'll be readable as houses, but they're just supposed to be background shapes, so really they're just fill-in. So here I'm just moving from color to color in the background, filling in so I don't have any blank white spaces. But be aware that anywhere that you put the detail is going to draw the eye, so be selective. Now here around the figure I'm going to add some of these greens that are reflective. And there are just a few other places that need to be tightened up. I'm going to add the blue to this roof, a little bit more detail here, shadow color under the roof, and then I'll add just a bit of texture to these plants, just stippling with a semi-wet brush. Then it's dry enough to erase the frisket on the figure, so I can finally go in with my figure colors here and finish him up. Bright yellow hat and a bit of skin tone, just enough to indicate what the body is doing. It's also wearing these bright red shorts, and then I'll use some brown or greenish color here to make the pole that he's moving the boat with. Okay, so that's the process. It's in a fairly good spot. I might add just a little bit more detail and then come back to you one more time to show you the finished piece. But you've seen how you work in layers with this type of approach, tightening it up as you go forward just a little bit at a time. Move from portion to portion as the paint dries and allows you to layer on more detail. And in this way, you finish up your painting. So I'm going to do that sort of work off camera here and come back to you one last time to show you the final piece. Now here's the finished painting after adding a few more details in the wooden structures, some shading to these planks, and some detail in the wood up here. So it's not that different from where we wound up last time, but this loose style really works nicely in this composition with the playful water and the colors in the houses and bushes and the strong foreground shadow shapes. So for this month in your own studios, I think you should play with taking a looser approach to a watercolor. Use this reference material if you want and try your hand at this exact same tutorial. So that concludes this month's painting tutorial. I hope that you've learned something you can take away to your own studio, and I hope that you'll join me next month for another painting tutorial. Thanks so much for watching.